Welcome to the Corporate Treasury 101 podcast. Today is a very special episode that we have been waiting to serve you for a while. We interview Eleanor Hill from TMI. Eleanor is an editor at TMI, Treasury Management International, and we are extremely pleased to have her as she also is one of the main hosts of the Treasury Cast podcast. It is basically one of the biggest treasury podcasts out there. Eleanor also interviews bankers, corporate treasurers, fintech founders, and much more in order to gather insights and identify trends on what is happening in the world of treasury. However, she introduces herself much better than I would right at the beginning of the episode, so you will soon know much more about her. In the episode of today, expect to learn what is TMI and the Treasury Cast, what are the major trends Eleanor has identified for the coming year, the importance of developing and maintaining a network in Treasury, what are Treasury associations, NTAs, and the role they play together with TMI, and much more. This is honestly one of the best episodes we recorded so far. Eleanor is fascinating and the conversation flows as we rarely had on the podcast. And on top of that, we had lots of fun talking all together, as you will hear very soon in this episode. If you enjoy it, please consider leaving us a review. Reviews are the best way to grow for podcasters, and this will allow us to invite more and more amazing guests like Eleanor. With all that being said, please welcome Eleanor Hill. Eleanor, thank you so much for joining us on the Corporate Treasury 101 podcast. Welcome. Can you maybe to start with and kick things off, quickly introduce yourself and explain us what you do?
Yeah, of course. Hopefully that's the easy question. I can do that one. But I'm like super inviting me to join you both here today. It's great to be here, and I know we got loads to talk about. But for anyone who doesn't know me, I'm editor of Treasury Management International magazine, so better known in the market as TMI. I've been doing that since 2018. And I previously edited all kinds of different financial magazines. So I was editor of World Accounting Report, FX and an MM magazine, Treasury Today, and I've been writing about Treasury for 15 years, which makes me sound really, really old and feel very old. But there it is. So I've seen a lot of evolution in that time. And in my spare time, I'm a very artsy person, outdoorsy person. So I love to paint, and I spend a lot of time walking my very large dog, who you may or may not hear at some point. But there we go.
Perfect. Would be a pleasure. And yeah, you may have started early, so that's totally fine. And so quite some knowledge about the treasury medias in general, I feel. Can you, focusing maybe a little bit on TMI, explain us what TMI does actually, and the purpose of. So the podcast you host quite regularly is the Treasury Cast.
Yep.
I think those two are linked. Can you quickly walk us through those two?
Yeah, of course. So TMI, like you say, we're a global treasury media provider. We've been going since 1992, so had our 30th birthday last year. And our sort of editorial ethos has been to provide top quality thought leadership on the trends shaping corporate treasury. So we do this by a number of different means, but a lot of it's interviewing kind of the great and good of the treasury world. So that's group treasurers, it's CFOs, it's bank execs, and also more and more fintechs. And the world of publishing has evolved hugely from just magazines, and also for sustainability reasons away from paper. So we've kind of embraced digital media quite a bit with our TMI app, and we've got webinars, and the Treasury Cast podcast is our TMI podcast channel. It's really taken off. It's huge. It's such a good platform because you kind of get a hit of the latest information, topics, everything from global minimum tax to sustainable supply chain financing. You get to speak to all kinds of different people from all different geographies, and it's kind of great fun as well as informative. So yeah, no complaints about that.
Awesome. Yeah, the Treasury podcast definitely are on the rise. That's amazing.
Well, I think it's just it's a different medium for people. And you can listen on a podcast while you're doing something else. You can multitask and you can kind of get a little bit of info. It doesn't take you as much time. And you get that human element to it as well, which I think is really important in this age of everyone kind of working remotely, and a lot of people still working remotely. It just gives you a bit more of a human connection.
Yeah, 100% agreed. Makes sense. I like to cook whilst I listen to podcasts. So it's true. Multitasking is definitely one of the perks.
Happy ingredients though, because you've got...
So I didn't say I cook well. I just like to cook once I do this. Okay, and so back to TMI maybe. So where do you operate exactly? So as this Treasury media, is there a geography notion, or like what types of work and editorial management do you do exactly?
A lot of people think because we're UK based that we're UK focused, which is absolutely not the case. We do have a big tie up with the EACT, so the European Association of Corporate Treasurers. So we work a lot with them. As a consequence, a lot of our subscribers are based in Europe, about 40%. We have about 25% in Asia Pacific, 25% in the Americas, and the rest in Middle East and Africa. So it's a really good spread. And we do, like you said, we've got articles, we've got podcasts. We also do industry surveys, which I love. They're so fascinating. You get to see the trends that are going on in different regions. We run various events in association with national treasury bodies. So like the Irish Association of Corporate Treasurers, we've been doing a conference with them. So that was last November, and we're doing that again this year. And then the EACT Summit, and then podcasts and webinars and more. So it's a huge production.
Yeah, it sounds like it.
Yeah, but we're a small team, a tight-knit team that's been working remotely for as long as TMI has been in existence. So yeah, it's quite interesting. So I've never actually been to the TMI physical office as much as I've worked for TMI.
Really?
2018. Now, did I interviews in London, and then I live in Southeast Kent, so near Canterbury. Some people will recognise that as a landmark in the UK. And then the rest of our team is all spread about in different areas of the UK. But it works really well when we sort of just communicate as would a normal team.
Awesome. Super clear.
That's really interesting. So, I mean, amongst all of that, then, Eleanor, you guys do articles, videos, various content pieces around Treasury. What have you seen in recent, I'm looking at 2023, have been the recent trends in Treasury overall? What's been coming up more and more? What are people interested?
Yeah. How long have you got? I could write a couple of books on this. There's so much going on. Honestly, like Treasury it's never dull. There's always something going on. But right now it's just absolutely immense. There's so many challenges in the macro environment. So if we look at risk management to begin with, we've still got some geographies dealing with the pandemic, and there's still definitely shocks for the pandemic. We've got Russia's war in Ukraine. We've got other geopolitical tensions boiling over, the energy crisis, the economic squeeze. So there's sort of recession on the cards as well. That means that there's a great deal of market volatility, and in turn that means there's a huge spotlight on FX. And also for treasurers that deal with commodities, commodity risk is massively back in the spotlight as well. So hedging those more effectively, I think, would be probably a number one priority for a lot of our readers and listeners at the moment. We did an interesting podcast on FX recently with a couple of guys from Barclays, and they were just talking about you've got to be looking at building more optionality into your hedging strategies these days. So it's kind of taking a fresh look at derivatives, seeing what's new, seeing what you could do a little bit differently. And for some treasurers, to be honest, it's using them for the first time as well. Like a lot of people haven't operated in an environment where they've had to. Maybe if they're younger treasurers or sort of newish into the profession, they haven't used derivatives before. So it's kind of getting familiar with those. And then I would say FX payments, or the sort of transaction FX side of things as well. So it's not just that FX where you've got the huge bits that you're hedging, but it's those tiny transactions that you're doing. It's the international payments. All of that adds up, and kind of making sure that you're getting the best rates on those as well. And I guess there's a lot of supply chain related risks at the moment as well. So with the pandemic, we've got people sort of nearshoring, friendshoring, reshoring. You've got new suppliers coming in, so that potentially means new countries, new currencies. but also increasingly seeing a lot of the bigger buyers wanting to support their suppliers who are financially strained at the moment. So looking at things like supply chain finance again. So that's been huge from a risk management point of view. If I look at cash management, I guess, kind of cash and liquidity point of view, obviously you've got rising interest rates. So people are looking at where should they be putting their excess cash if they're lucky enough to have excess cash. Not everyone is. So it's sort of that what's acceptable in terms of risk. Should they just be in deposits? Are deposit rates reflecting the actual rate rises quickly enough? Are MMFs a good answer at the moment, or is there kind of regulatory reform on the horizon? And then a lot around cash forecasting with the economic squeeze. So people looking at better forecasting tech, trying to look at where working capital is trapped. And that also comes back to the supply chain angle. Because I don't know what you guys are hearing, but there's a lot of companies that we speak to that are sitting on significant inventories at the moment. So there was that whole move away just in time, just in case, and people were frightened about not having enough stock to sell because of the supply chain issues. So they've got these massive inventories, so that's tying up working capital. So there's sort of some work to do there with other departments as well. But I don't know if that echoes what you guys are hearing.
100%. Yeah, absolutely.
We did a whole, in light of everything that's been going on, we've done quite a lot of episodes explaining why interest rates are up, how they go up, how they go down, who sets them, etc. like that. I think hedging was one of the most popular episodes. People are really interested in that, probably to do with the times that we are going through, like you said. And I guess that's all on top of just the normal challenges in Treasury, right? Which is like talent and talent acquisition, making Treasury accessible to people and to getting good talent in. You've got technology bringing this huge wave of demand as well for, again, good talent, but also better use of the existing data that Treasury sits on. Is that those things, I guess, have always been there, right? But it just sort of squeezed more with the recent economic condition.
It's a lot more difficult for treasurers, and there's a huge concern in the industry about attracting future talent. When we talk to the NCAs, they're quite concerned around attracting younger members as well, and how to liaise with sort of universities and make sure that we're bringing on that next generation. There is an issue where, Treasury is not necessarily seen as the sexiest profession. And there's also, as a diversity issue, it's still very male, pale, stale. So even when we go to industry events, I'll quite often be only one of a few women. It's very white dominated. It's age range, also a huge lack of diversity there. I think there's a lot more that needs to be done to make it feel accessible to people. But like you said, Hassan, also loads of new skills required. So we do need people who are up on data analytics and AI. And those are those younger generations. Of course, we need to be looking at upskilling existing staff as well. And there's a lot of opportunities to look to technology for better training for existing staff and maybe transfer opportunities within organisations. I think we've got to be thinking about new ways to recruit people, getting the next generation on, really pushing things like blind recruitment so that we get that diversity being through. But there's got to have people with technology skills. You also, we did a survey back end of last year looking at what kind of skills treasurers might be looking for when they're recruiting in the future. And it was interest in tech, it was people skills, but it was also an interest in sustainability and ESG. And that's another huge theme coming through for treasurers, becoming massively mainstream, and treasurers wanting to appoint an ESG champion almost within the organisation. So there's a lot going on. It's moved beyond green bonds and loans to sustainable deposits, sustainable SDF. We've got ESG linked FX derivatives. There's a whole lot going on there as well. Yes, there's the negative connotations, there's the greenwashing. But again, that's another thing I think the finance is going forward.
Okay, that was a lot. Just for our listeners, Guillaume, we've touched on pretty much all of those topics that Eleanor just mentioned. The only one that I don't think I've heard of before is MMF. I think you mentioned, Eleanor.
Yeah.
This is Corporate Treasury 101. So, and I'm here to be the dumb guy that asks the silly questions. So What's MMF? You mentioned it just briefly.
MMF is a money market fund, so it will be an investment that some treasurers will use. They're quite popular with treasurers. Again, that's evolving. Actually, the ESG MMFs are coming, so there's a few about, but there's also a lot of regulation in that space. There's been some reform already, both in the EU and in the States, but there's a little bit more coming. So potentially.
And why is it a tool that treasurers like exactly? What's one of the features that makes it convenient or safe, whatever it is?
So that's one of the main things, and kind of very reliable because of the heavy regulation around it. Feel like it's a safe place to put your money.
Awesome.
Indeed. Very cool. And so, out of interest, Eleanor, have you seen then with this expanding need for better treasury in different corporations due to the conditions, do you see more interest from other parts of companies? So where typically perhaps TMI was just attracting treasurers, maybe you even starting to hear more from CFOs, for example, and from HR and whatnot. Is that also have you seen treasury broaden into other parts of an organization?
Absolutely, and Treasury is actually recognised by other parts of the organisation.
Victory.
The Treasurer does now, that's half the battle. But we definitely have our readership is probably about 10% CFO. We quite often speak with CFOs about the Treasury is up to what expectations they want. And we increasingly see that there's a lot of dialogue between the Treasurer and the CFO, but also with other departments, like you mentioned. So with procurement, that link is becoming much stronger as we look into those supply chain issues. With ESG departments, sustainability functions, a couple of treasurers I know are actually responsible for sustainability alongside Treasury now. Others are just working really closely with the sustainability department to make sure that they're getting things right. HR, I don't know so much. I haven't heard so much on that. So I'd be curious to hear if you have heard that. I haven't. It's not one that I've come across. But certainly Treasury's reach is broadening. Those relationships are improving. It's a lot of work still to do. And the IT department is always one way. And you've got to have a great relationship. You don't always have time.
You better. Yeah, HR, very little, to be honest. There is always this payroll dimension, right, that is somehow linked to Treasury for the payment in batches and the confidentiality and so on. So that's one aspect, that it's something that we have tackled very little, except for the recruitment aspect that you mentioned earlier, which is also indeed very present, but that's linked to Treasury. But okay, super clear. And so going back on the different dimensions and the trends that you've identified, what are the tools that you have also maybe heard of or seen in the market recently that, let's say, maybe are the tools of the future, or how treasurers can leverage those tools in order to tackle the more and more demanding tasks, such as the high volatility of the market, FX, commodities risk, and so on? What do you see there?
Yeah, it's interesting. There's so many different things going on, and obviously it's going to depend Treasury department to Treasury department. But I think you've got to be looking at automation at this point, because there's so much for people to do. Treasury departments are typically pretty lean. They might only a couple of people if you're lucky. There's at the other end, you've got the huge Treasury departments where they've got their own tech person or even their own tech arm, but they are few and far between. So it's a classic case of kind of doing more or less. So you've got to be looking at robotic process, or so RPA. You can combine that with a bit of artificial intelligence, AI. So you've got smart RPA, even if it's just for extracting data from one source to get it into another source, without all of that manual work. So it just happens automatically. I think APIs, application programming interfaces, are going to be very important. Again, they're not silver bullet, but you can use them for a number of different tasks. You can integrate systems very easily with them. You can use them for back reporting, so you can just ping the back via the API and get an instant report back. You can use them for payment initiation, so you don't have to log out of your TMS and go onto the bank portal and do your payment from there. You can actually do it within the TMS, so you don't have to do all that re-logging in. You can get instant FX rates plugged in via an API into your international payments workflow. So that comes back to the transaction effect that I spoke about. so that you know instantly what it's going to be, you know what the deductions are going to be, so there's a lot more visibility there. But that's kind of stuff that's happening today, and people are implementing, and there's great possibilities there, as much as there's obviously risks and there's costs and all the rest of it. But there's I guess that's innovation reality, but there's a lot of innovation hype out there as well. So we probably can't do this podcast without talking about generative AI, which is ChatGPT.
Yes, I wanted.
Yes, when it's all over LinkedIn at the moment. So it's kind of a major name in this space. It is a generative AI chatbot, so it kind of produces content essentially, but you could use it to write a treasury policy eventually. You could use it to give you information about like FX and help you to inform decisions. But it's very, very, very early days, and people are not doing that. So it's not set to revolutionize treasury just yet. I certainly don't think so. And ditto things like the metaverse. We've heard that come up a couple of times in treasury conversations. We see more webinars about it. Do I think that treasurers should be prioritizing it right now over other innovations? Not for me. So I think it's looking at what can really make a difference today, and that would be that automation, so the RPA, adding in AI for cash flow, looking at those APIs, but having an eye on the future. So you've got to be thinking about sort of CBDCs, so central bank digital currencies, and also cryptocurrencies. Not going to be relevant to every treasurer, certainly not at this stage, but that's the way the world is moving, is towards digital money, digital wallet, and anyone who's sort of into e-commerce has got to be just keeping an eye on.
Okay, awesome. And so to name a few, I don't know if you mentioned that you're talking more and more with fintechs, and probably with that come innovations and so on. ChatGPT, I wanted to ask this question. Awesome that you touched upon it. I don't know if the applications yet for Treasury are really reliable or 100% live on the market. Obviously, it will come though. But so right now, and maybe in the coming months or even year, do you have like some fintechs, new payment solutions or reporting tools and so on that you have in mind, or what's your vision on the market?
I don't want to single any particular ones out, probably.
Okay.
Because there's a lot of different ones out there, but I'm going to point people towards the TMI innovation.
Okay.
So this is where we host a load of different fintechs. We interview them, we ask them what they're up to, and then we kind of give a verdict on how we think they can help treasurers. So it's innovation.treasury-management.com, and they can kind of have a browse and look at all different fintechs in different areas. So some of them are looking at risk management, some of them are looking at dynamic discounting, and they all have some relevance to treasury. Not all of them operate in all geographies yet. They're small, they're upcoming. So it's worth having a kind of look around, but there's some very interesting solutions out there for sure, particularly for treasurers with slightly smaller budgets. And what I'm seeing now is that treasurers are not afraid to go to work with fintechs directly. So in the past, it was very much looking for a fintech bank tie-up. We've seen a lot more of that. We're seeing a lot of fintechs, cash forecasting platforms, working with banks to integrate that into their systems, that kind of thing, so it's available for that bank's particular customer. But we're seeing treasurers just going direct to fintechs, having those relationships and getting things at a budget that they can afford.
Awesome. Yeah, we'll put the link of the TMI Innovation Lab in the description for those interested, so they can have a look and see what's out there.
So Eleanor, super interesting topics to touch on. One of the things that Guillaume's taught me about Treasury is you can't get away with talking about Treasury without also talking about regulation, which much to everyone's dismay, I think, in the Treasury world. So how have you seen, again, with all this change coming in Treasury, have you seen regulation coming as fast as well in the market? And is that something treasurers are concerned about? How are they tackling it? What's happening in the regulation space with all this rapid change in Treasury?
Yeah, I mean, there's always regulation, and it's always evolving. So I mentioned the money market fund regulation earlier. That's just one minor part of what goes on in Treasury and the kind of regulations that treasurers are worried about. And of course, it varies hugely by region. But if we look at, so I mentioned the European Association of Corporate Treasurers earlier. They provide a regular update to their members on regulations to watch, and they've got 15 regulations on their watch list at the moment. So that kind of gives you an idea of the scope. So yes, there's a huge amount going on. It varies massively to where you operate, but one of the ones that's still ongoing is LIBOR transition, because the USD LIBOR is being phased out mid this year. So there's a lot of contracts, etc., that are still being transitioned across to new reference rates. There's a number of regulations coming into force at the beginning of next year, so beginning of 2024, that people need to be thinking about. One of them I mentioned already that we've done a podcast on, that's the global minimum tax. So this is the OECD move to 15% minimum corporation tax rate, and that was adopted by the EU at the end of last year. It's very ambitious, and there's a sort of a lot of suspicions that timelines will move and this will float on forever. But, there may potentially be an impact on where companies are operating, because certain jurisdictions won't be as tax efficient anymore. So that's obviously going to have an impact on Treasury and cash flows and structures and all the rest of it. And then on the ESG side of things, we're seeing treasurers become increasingly involved there, particularly if they're doing things like green financing or sustainable supply chain finance. So in the EU, we did have the non-financial reporting directive. That's going to be replaced by the CSRD, so the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive. And that elevates sustainability reporting to the same level as financial reporting for the first time. So that's quite a huge deal. And as much as it's not directly linked to Treasury, we'll probably see quite a lot of treasurers getting involved, like I said, if they're involved in ESG themselves, but also because they're just used to doing reporting. They know what's required. So they're probably going to have quite a few people coming to them asking questions. So that's one to be prepared for. But the number of regulations, if you look at each region, it's absolutely huge. We published, I think it was today, a piece looking at payments regulations in Asia, and each jurisdiction has its own thing going on. So it's nigh on impossible to keep up with it all as a treasurer. So you asked about kind of how best to tackle it and what treasurers can do. Absolutely, at this point, got to look for support. So it might be internal experts, and it's always worth kind of looking around internally before you go externally. You've got in-house legal teams who could help. But also turn to your banks, look at consultants, your NTAs. So a lot of the NTAs have their own regulatory specialists. They'll be able to assist. Again, look to media, because we do try to run explainers on things when we can. And another potential area to look to for the future is RegTech. So it's like a branch of fintech, but looking at regulation. At the moment, it's kind of mainly for the banks. So there's a lot of big RegTech firms helping the banks out behind the scenes. But it is emerging into the corporate space, particularly around ESG reporting. So I think that's maybe one to look into for the future. But regulation is just, an ever-evolving beast. Absolutely ask for help.
Yeah, so that sounds like a dream world indeed.
Just a quick terms check. I think, Guillaume, the only one that stuck out for me there was LIBOR. I think we've topped that when we talked interest rates, that banks use that to set the interest rates between each other. Is that right?
Yeah, exactly. That's it.
Very good. Making sure I still remember everything that Guillaume has taught me.
Spot on, Wissam. You're spot on.
So I've kind of downloaded quite a lot there of what I'm seeing. And as I said, I could go on forever. There's so much going on. It's nothing to write about or talk about. But is there anything else that you've heard from your podcast interviewees, or you're just seeing in the market in terms of trends for 2023?
Well, the one that came often, especially, so obviously one of our first big interview was with Mike Richards, where we talked about the organization of the Treasury Department and the different roles we can find in Treasury departments. And obviously we tackled the issue, so we say, of talent acquisition and actually retention. That's really something that is quite of a struggle for treasurers, apparently. And one quote from him that I find quite interesting is that there is not a talent pool, there is a talent puddle when it comes to treasury. And I mean, I guess that makes his business going well, right? But it's also true when you see how many positions are out there and how much of a niche market it is. You mentioned it, getting young talents out of university, also because so far there are not that many very treasury focused studies. You start to have certain modules in finance masters and so on. I think it's still quite rare, and indeed treasury is like most of the people don't know what it is when they come out of uni.
Yeah.
So talent acquisition and retaining for sure, and that's also something Bart Hendricks from Civil Logistics mentioned. So he's responsible for the building and reinforcement of his team. And obviously he was like, yeah, we are creating an in-house bank, a shared service center, and we need to find the right talents with the right skills, which the needs constantly evolves of. So we are talking more and more about data skills, data management skills, data science, on top of treasury knowledge and so on. So yeah, this one, and you touched upon it, that's definitely one that I think must be insisted on, because it seems to be quite the trend in 2023. Is it new? Probably not, but that still remains one of the main issues.
Yeah. Sam, I think you.
I mean, my background is in engineering, right? So the thing that I found most interesting from all of our conversations is just how big data science has been getting in Treasury overall. Again, things that Mike's mentioned before, Bart Hendricks mentioned. We also had TIS, which is a Treasury vendor, on, who talked a lot about, and we had a really interesting discussion about upskilling existing organizations as well.
Yeah, Green Man from TMS. Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah.
Him along
he used
with
to be a treasurer, so he has like all kinds of insight.
Yeah, super interesting indeed. So I found that really interesting as a challenge, which is treasury departments need to not only recruit for the new age of data being the new gold, but also upskill existing talent, which sounds harder to me, at least.
Yeah, agree. Particularly when you've got so much on your plate already and it's hard to find time.
Yeah, exactly. It's super hard, right? So, and they also mentioned back then that actually some departments aren't even hiring finance majors, just going straight to the data science majors and saying, well, it's easier to teach a data scientist treasury than it's to teach treasurer data science. Yeah, which was quite interesting as well. So I think that seems to be a recurring theme from all of our exploration into treasury. Is that data science is a must-have skill nowadays.
Yeah, and so continuing on people, actually, maybe that's the proper transition. I would like to touch upon networks and networking in treasury, Eleanor. Would you say that developing and maintaining a network is important in treasury? And whether the answer is yes or no, why so?
Yeah, I'd say absolutely yes, but I kind of have to caveat that because I'm a massive introvert, and networking is my absolute nightmare. So if you're someone like me who hates networking events and would rather just be in your own bubble, it can seem like an absolute nightmare. But it's important for a number of reasons to kind of build connections with other people. So it's knowledge sharing, first of all, particularly at the kind of NTA level. It's seeing best practice from other people, but also learning how not to approach something. So treasurers are a great bunch, and they're very friendly, and they'll quite happily tell you how a project has gone and what went right and what went wrong. And I think that's probably one of the most important things, is that knowledge sharing, but also for moral support, because treasury can be a really tough job. There's an awful lot on your plate, and sometimes it's just nice to talk to someone who knows what it's like, and kind of can just support you through something, or give you a bit of mentorship on the side, but they actually understand how it is to be a treasurer, to have all those pressures on you. So yes, it's absolutely important to develop it and maintain it, to make regular contact. But I understand that it's a lot easier for some people than for others.
Yeah.
So, as an introvert, then, do you have any tips for people? How do you get yourself going as an introvert?
Email. And so I do use LinkedIn absolutely loads. So even if I've been to a conference, like I'll get the delegate list in advance, and I'll target maybe a couple of people that I'll go and speak to. I set myself I've got to go and speak to these 3 people. I'll be okay, do that, or get through that excruciating moment with maybe a glass of wine. And then the rest of them that I haven't managed to reach out to, I'll kind of connect with on LinkedIn and say, oh, so sorry, I didn't have time to meet you at XYZ conference, and kind of take it from there. So, limit the human contact if that's difficult, and use the online resources because they're there.
But that's super funny because you hosted, if I'm not mistaken, hundreds of podcasts by now. So you obviously interact with many people, Treasury and broader.
I know.
And I guess that's a good leverage as well, right? To get in touch with people, have a discussion in a defined context and frame. So it doesn't sound as much like as a Treasury or network event where you should describe a bit more as an extrovert.
Yeah, I do find it really exhausting, and I think that's one of if you're an introvert, you don't get energy from other people. It kind of makes you tired being with other people. So I'm super antisocial when we go to Treasury events, even Treasury events that we host. If I'm moderating a panel or whatever, I'll do all of that, maybe do like half an hour networking afterwards. But everyone knows by now that I will go back to my hotel room. I will not go for the drinks. I will not do that. I just need time to go and like recharge, and also to process things. So my thought process is always very sort of considered, and I'm not one of those people who likes to be on the spot thinking about things, whatever. I would like to have time to prepare. So this is why I was happy that you sent me some questions in advance to have a think about and not put me on the spot too much.
My great pleasure. But now I also understand a little bit more the zero presence at the office, 100% remote work. That aligns a bit with the introduction, I guess. Okay, but super clear. And so moving on this networking aspect, how do you see and how can the different actors in the Treasury world, so I'm talking about banks, system vendors, associations, as you just mentioned. We touched upon consultants as well. How all those actors can collaborate to bring value to their clients by collaborating and networking. Is it something here?
I think we're seeing a lot more partnerships. So that's formal arrangements with fintech banks. And then there's the kind of the more informal collaboration. So things like Treasury think tanks. Some of the banks will organise all of their corporate clients, and a lot more co-creation as well. So it's a lot more two-way. But I still think it's quite compartmentalised, and I'd love to see it go a little bit deeper. And dare I say, set aside some rivalries for the good of the profession. So if we think about kind of specific issues like KYC, I know that treasurers would love more coordination between banks on that particular area, and it's very difficult, but it never seems to happen. So I'd love to see a little bit more, kind of a little deeper collaboration. It also goes for the Treasury publishing world, because there's some organizations that act very competitively, or they're very territorial in the publishing world, when actually it would be great to work together and get a little bit more reach. So yeah, I'd love to push the boundaries of that a little bit. I don't know how we go about it. That's the challenge. But if people are open for working together a bit more at a deeper level, that will be excellent going forward. So maybe it's going to have to face some more networking. But I think it's getting people together in a room and having really candid conversations. And that's sort of few and far between in Treasury, because you're normally in some kind of formal setting where people are afraid to share, like I said, what went wrong, or they find it difficult to voice their concerns because they're worried about upsetting a certain person or something. So it's almost like you need to have a gloves off type event where, what goes on tour stays on tour kind of thing. And you can just have those very, very candid conversations. That would be amazing. That would be my wish for the profession.
Yeah, for it's super interesting. The one you mentioned around KYC. So I spent a little bit of time in the banking environment, and KYC is a pain. That's for sure. Yeah. But so, what do you mean exactly? The banks could collaborate further together, exactly, to like centralize this KYC information, because there is a huge data privacy issue here. Yeah. So is it part of the fintechs that you mentioned that are in the back end of the? That's super interesting. Okay.
Sorry, guys, just to jump in. What can you explain KYC a little bit for me?
Yeah, so it's know your customer. So it's essentially what the banks go through when they're onboarding anyone into the bank. So it's like providing all of your ID and who are your bank signatories, who can authorize payments, etc., etc. And for every bank, it's different. So every treasurer is providing all these different documents to different banks, and they might be asked like 3 or 4 times by different parts of the bank for different information. And then when someone who's a signatory leaves, then they have to update that information. And it's just a real ongoing pain because it's not standardized across the banks. So Swift have been doing a lot of work with their KYC registry and trying to get that underway, but it's taking time because of the enormity of it. And there are fintechs that are coming into this space. One of them is associated with ING, so it's called Corp ID, which is COORPID. And that is on the Innovation Lab, and they're doing an amazing job at trying to make everything easier. But it's associated with ING, but crucially, they've opened it up to other banks. And it's now kind of just getting that momentum. What it needs is for more banks to push behind it. So there's a kernel there, and it's making really good progress, but it needs other banks to join in.
Very interesting. So what's TMI doing in this space, Eleanor? I think that's one of your mission statements in a way, right? To foster those conversations.
Yeah, the thing about us is that we're lucky because we're kind of an independent body sitting in the middle, almost like a mediator, if you like. So we can connect those different Treasury stakeholders across the globe, but we can also sometimes give banks that candid feedback. So we can listen to treasurers, we can anonymize the issues that they're having, and we can take that to the banks and say, look, you're not doing well enough here. I have had a conversation with one bank, actually was on KYC, where I was speaking with a couple of corporates, and they were saying, well, we chose bank XYZ over bank ABC because bank ABC's KYC was just such a nightmare. So, I've gone to bank ABC and I said, well, do you know that you're actually losing business because of this? Like, obviously not naming any names. And, then they've gone away and go, okay, we really, really need to work on this. And they have. So we're in that position of being able to kind of sit between and be a neutral party and facilitate those conversations and things going forward.
That's super interesting. So it's also cool that you guys have that authority, that they actually listen as well. So that comes from...
I think it comes from we've got a good history in the market. We have a lot of great connections. We have direct lines into people, execs high up in the bank, but also to treasurers who speak to us candidly because they trust us. So there's an issue with all media, and as soon as you tell someone that you're a journalist, they're like, oh, and they're practically going to be going and selling private stories to like really bad newspapers. And that's totally not what TMI does. It's not really what any B2B media does. So the aim is, for us, is to talk about what's going on in the industry in terms of progression and how we can make the profession better. It's not about, gossipy stories, etc. So I think it's having that position of trust that comes from the quality of our content. The fact that we always quote check with people. So if we're working with you, everything will come to you to check that you're happy with it before it goes anywhere. And also that we say kind of no to overt sales pitches. So it's quite funny because people think I'm quite gentle and quite calm, which I generally am. If I see something that I don't like or I don't feel comfortable with, I will absolutely speak up about it. So most of the time, like 99% of the time, we write all of our own content. Very occasionally, banks will come to us and say, "Oh, can we use you as a channel just to push out this content?" And sometimes it's great, no problems, just make a few tweaks. Other times it's just a pure sales pitch. And at that point, I go back to them and I say, honestly, I don't think anyone's going to read this. And I don't think you're going to get value for money out of it. And so it's kind of having that censorship, if you like, and the ability to gatekeep the quality that gives us that trusted reputation. Well, that's what I hope anyway.
That's super nice. Super interesting.
I've kind of waffled on there a lot about what I'm seeing of what we're doing at DMI, but I'm kind of conscious that you guys see a lot of different things as well. So tell me about building treasury networks from your perspective and whether you've got any top tips for introverts like me.
But so we're happy that we are seeing the same things, apparently. So that's already great news. I was going to say, like, to create and develop a network, one of the very good tips is to create a podcast, which you're already doing. I mean, you're hosting quite some episodes as well. But so definitely that has been a game changer for us initially. So jokes aside, we wanted to create something together with Sam and I. I was curious about Treasury, and we were like, okay, we are both huge fans of podcasts. We consume a lot of it. So like, why not creating something like this and see where it goes?
Yeah.
And we ended up talking to more and more amazing people. I mean, literally at the beginning, the episodes were just between the two of us. And we quickly interviewed people that we know. So Eleanor, who was my former manager, Daniel Sanchez from a big FMCG company. Then we got Mike Richards on the show that gave us quite some exposure. And then it's funny to see how much people are keen on talking about Treasury, ultra positively responsive. I mean, we really do not struggle at all finding guests because everybody wants to talk about Treasury, spread the word, and are super keen. And so we do this obviously completely for free. I think that goes back a little bit to what you were telling about the oversally content. Creating content for free and proposing it for free is, I think, great to develop your network, first of all, because you get in touch with people within the Treasury world, but people also see and get value from you completely for free, and that gives you a certain authority, right? I'm not saying that we are there yet, but it's definitely one of the way. So yeah, creating a podcast is a good way, and more generally, creating content, whatever you are. I'm thinking about consultancy firms, banks, and you mentioned it with the different collaboration they were doing, and like starting to do knowledge sharing sessions or panel discussions. I think that's great. That's something we see more and more, and that's great strategy to spread the word, bring value, inform on Treasury. And we mentioned it, right? The chat GPT thing. What can be done with that? Like, let's discuss it. Let's sit down with the AI professionals, with Treasury people who like to find some new ways of doing and automating stuff. So yeah, that's one I have in mind. What do you think, Sam? Do you have other trends in mind?
I mean, I can be more generic about like networking in general. I think. I mean, you mentioned it really nicely, actually, Eleanor, earlier when you said about just like, for example, I think you mentioned something interesting, which was you put time limits on how much you were networking. Even so you said like, oh, I'll just go for half an hour or do something like this, which is, I mean, I would self-identify as an extrovert. I think I get a lot of energy from talking to people, but I still feel anxiety a lot of the time as well. I think everyone does to a certain degree. And I think it's just about, just doing the bare minimum, going up and saying hello without actually talking about Treasury.
Yeah.
Offering someone a biscuit, something like this just gets the ball rolling a lot of the time.
Yeah. Break the ice.
Yeah, just break the ice, and then not have a conversation about Treasury or a professional conversation at all with the first 2, 3, 5 people you speak to.
Yeah.
And then maybe when you're warmed up a little bit, you can start actually delving into it. So I think that's definitely one, but I think it's just generally about putting yourself out there, right? Again, I think I echo Guillaume's point. That's what we did with the podcast, was just sort of putting ourselves out there. And then just generally, wherever you go, there's no harm. People are just generally nice, I find, especially in Treasury.
Yeah, I've worked in other parts of finance, and I want to say Treasury is
it's less so.
And they
Out them, Eleanor, who are the worst? Is it the accountants? I heard Treasury don't like accountants.
No, I liked all the accountants there were lovely. It was more on the trading side probably when they were.
I see. Okay.
Characters, simply saying. Very difficult to be a woman in this. Treasurers are lovely, and there's always interesting things to say. Sometimes we try and get treasurers to submit exciting photos to go in the mag if we're doing a profile. And I was one guy who told us all about these amazing holidays that he'd been on, and he sent in photos of him stroking a cheetah. We're like, okay, how are we going to get better from here? So we always try and get a bit competitive with people, like, well, this is what we've had in the past, so what are you going to send us in terms of a photo, which is always fun. And then I find that if anyone has a dog, then you can speak about them. I know probably more about certain treasurers' dogs than I do about great. Guys, great.
But yeah, common ground, right? That's what it is. I think that's the basics of conversation in general. I think another one that I will touch on that Gail mentioned, I think in a way as well, which is give before you take. I think everything Gail and I have done, we've always focused on giving to whoever we can in whatever way we can, whether that's, offering to do some work for free or whatever, or offering to give a shout out or putting people in touch with each other, being that point of connection. I think, again, it's already been mentioned a couple of times, Mike Richard from the Treasury recruitment company, he's just amazing at that. I think we were really blown away working with him, and then just how many times he would just keep throwing people our way and saying, hey, by the way, Hussam and Guillaume are doing a great job with Corporate Treasury 101. You should talk to them about this. And then we just get an email in, and then we get a contact straight away. And just, and we appreciate that a lot. It made us want to give back as much as possible.
Yeah.
Which was a lesson for us, which is just go around giving and the universe gives back.
Yeah. Without expecting to receive.
Exactly. Without expecting to receive. Indeed. Just go out to give.
Yeah. People are always like that. Me, from a freelance point of view, so doing freelance writing work outside of TMI, and most of the time I'm like way too busy with TMI stuff, so I don't do much, but I'll inevitably refer to another journalist. So I say, oh, you could try XYZ or whoever, and they're always surprised that I've referred them on to another journalist. And I'm like, well, I'm not going to take the work, so I'd much rather that someone else has that opportunity, and these are really good people. So yeah, pay it forward, please.
Wow, and you're embodying the advice you were giving earlier, which is collaborate even with competition to create more value. So that's beautiful. Okay, and maybe going back to this networking because I think that's part of the work and the mission statement of associations and treasury associations, right? Connecting treasurers within regions, countries, and so on. We'd like to explore a little bit the topic of those treasury associations. So you mentioned EACT earlier, a European Association of Corporate Treasurers. I'm going to name a few just so our listeners have those names in mind. We have also the ATEB, which is the Association des Trésoriers d'Entreprise Belge. It's this equivalent of EACT, but really focused on Belgium. IACT, I believe, is quite active as well, the Irish associations, and so on. So what are their roles or missions exactly, and what do they stand for in that regard?
The NTAs, they do an absolutely amazing job. I just want to take a minute to kind of shout out to all of the people who run them behind the scenes. A lot of them are doing it alongside day jobs, and it takes a huge amount of organisation, and they do an amazing job at it. It's kind of making Treasury a real profession in certain countries. So it might be exams. They're responsible for special exams. They have networks. They have a lot of knowledge sharing. It's also about building the future of Treasury in each country or region. So they hold things like tech days. So you mentioned the Belgian Treasury Association, that they recently had a tech day, and the Austrian Treasury Association has the same. And they get tech companies to come in and speak to treasurers about what they're doing, not only what they're doing today, but what's happening tomorrow, what they should be looking at for the future. And again, it's that kind of non-salesy, it's like, we're here to actually talk to you about technology, not just pitch you our system. And it's connecting people, but it's also really, really important things, particularly at the EACT level, like lobbying regulators. So speaking to regulators about the impact of potential regulations or changes to regulations, how that's going to impact the real economy, how that's going to impact Treasury, things like those MMF regulators that we spoke about earlier. So there's an awful lot that goes on with Treasury associations, and they're always busy, and huge value add. So for anyone that isn't a member of their local Treasury association, and there are tons of associations, there's little ones popping up absolutely everywhere. Japan, Greece, there's a huge established one in South Africa.
Okay, and maybe continuing on that, what's the process to enter into such association? Do you need to meet a certain list of criteria? I guess you need to be a treasury professional, right? But
exactly. It really varies from association. Most of them will have membership criteria on their website. So some monetary costs involved with a lot of them, but supporting the organization.
Awesome, we'll do, and we'll put a bunch of links in the description. But Eleanor, very much looking forward to meet you in person in that 30 minutes window at one of the events soon, right?
I'll put you on my list of 2 or 3 people.
Yes, it is very warm up. So, do you guys work with them, Eleanor? Like as TMI, are you guys associated with them, or do you work behind the scenes with them as well?
So we have a big association with the EACP. So we're kind of their official publisher, if you like. We help them with events and all kinds of things throughout the year. And we also help all of the Treasury associations under the EACP banner, sort of supporting them with pro bono technical administrative support, kind of just partnerships that look into publications. So we do a publication for the South African Association. We do events for specific NTAs. So quite often work with the Belgian Association. Most recently joined, Reese join, and we'll be doing an event with them as well. So yeah, there's an awful lot of kind of support that goes on in terms of setting up their activities, helping them to develop those in-house secretariat skills, etc., etc. So there's a lot of practical support, but also that thought leadership side of things. And then our distribution kind of mirrors where new NTAs have emerged. So Japan, Korea, and there's also, we're seeing more now. We sort of try and make sure that our readership and distribution covers the NTAs as well. So there's quite an interesting little relationship between PMI and always evolving, and we always love being challenged to do the next thing that they're looking for.
Anything specific you guys have done that you want to call out? Like, I don't know, topics or conferences you've hosted, something else really stood out in some collaboration?
The IACT conference that we did last year in November, so that was in Dublin. I moderated 3 panels there. One of them was a slight surprise because someone got COVID the day before and had to step in. Not having met the other panelists. It was a great session now, but the one that stands out for me was on ESG. And it was totally like no holds barred. It was absolutely like a kind of ugly discussion on ESG, and really, really open. And I had so much amazing feedback from people in the audience saying that it was the best discussion they've had on ESG because it was just real, and sort of looking at whether treasurers actually need to engage on ESG or not. And no, they don't necessarily if it's not where their organisation is at, but these are the areas where you can add value if you want to. So that was one that was sort of stands out for me. But the main event for us every year is the EACT Summit. That's kind of our main collaborative partnership. So it's in April this year. It's in Leuven, in Belgium, and it's huge.
Yes.
All of the NTAs come together. So there'll be sort of 10 people each of the European NTAs who come. And we have all kinds of different speakers who come and present on everything from like cybersecurity to trade finance innovations. I'm doing another session on ESG, so that should be good fun.
Finding a favorite topic here. Yeah, absolutely.
I have written a handbook on ESG in Treasury, so it's kind of my pet thing. But it's always been an area of interest for me. So I used to work in private wealth management before I started in Treasury. And one of the ladies that I worked with, she was into sustainable investing. That was super, super early on before it kind of became a thing. So, I always looked up to her. She was kind of a mentor for me. And so it came through from there, really. So, so the EACP Summit is probably our biggest collaborative event. And looking forward to that one, getting the flavour of all the local things that are going on.
Yeah, maybe following the trend of you asking us the question back, Eleanor. On the Treasury Association, to be honest, our knowledge is a little bit limited, but I feel Treasury is on the rise for sure, and that's a little bit the feeling we get from all our interviews. Also, as per the data it gathers, right? Cash and cash data or data related to cash becomes critical, especially in periods of recessions. You named it earlier with the rising interest rates and so on. So Treasury definitely is on the rise. It becomes more and more strategic and popular. That's something we touched upon with the TIS thought leadership as well. So I believe in this context, collaboration between association and between different actors, right? Banks, system vendors, media companies, and so on. There is everything to win by collaborating. New solutions for sure. Our expertise is a bit limited in here, so I'm not going to speak too much about it. But for sure, sharing knowledge, and that's beautiful. That's something we mentioned earlier. Definitely, there is value in that. Taking the time to educate people, and there are still, I feel, so many topics that can be tackled that we haven't yet so much in Treasury in particular. I'm thinking about cryptocurrencies. You named it earlier. Is there something to be done here that would be really of added value and so on? I'm not sure, but maybe it's worth checking. Maybe in an in-house bank context or something really internal or between entities within the same network. There for sure are some things to do, and this will come from collaboration, AI as well. We named it ChatGPT. I'm sure like the collective thinking will help advancing the technology and helping it improve the life of treasurers, right? Because as you named it, it's a very heavy work. So yeah, that's my view on it. What do you think, Sam?
I mean, we've talked about cryptocurrency, right, Gil? We did it like episode like 40 something, 45, 44. Talked about Bitcoin as in form of hedging in terms of how it can be related to cash pooling and whatnot as well. And so but definitely more to be explored, I think, for sure. I mean, I'm not a treasurer, right? So I couldn't really tell you what treasurers could do more, but I could say that all the treasurers I've spoken to or we've spoken to in these podcasts, both on and off the podcast, have always mentioned that talent has always been an issue. Treasury is not sexy enough. We can't get people in. We can't get people to be aware of it, etc., etc. So coming at it from the content side, I still think there's a lot I haven't seen, at least, and I think that's where Guillaume and I are trying to go with our podcast, of just like outreach to the newer generations in new formats and new formats of content. I think podcasting's a big one. I see a lot of white papers still in Treasury, which I think might cater to a certain demographic, but I don't know if that's what university students are reading or college students are reading, or making them aware of what Treasury is as a career path.
Can you kind of envisage a Treasury TikTok?
There's a TikTok for everything, honestly. So, I mean, here's the thing. The approach Guillaume and I have always put is something's better than nothing. So maybe you can get one with millions and millions of views, but you might inspire that odd person that's in some sort of mathsy, finance-y division, that you kind of give them a little insight into, how cash pooling is done and how the intricacies of hedging and things like this. And it might just spark a curiosity, right? You never know what influences someone down a path.
I'm going to make you promise now then that if I start a Treasury TikTok, you'll both come on it.
Well, I'll be on it. We could be. Well, I mean, part of making Treasury sexy again was us being in the Treasury content space. Guillaume's French accent was what we put forward.
I don't know if that we convert, but we can definitely.
Well, repeat your friend.
Yeah, but look, I don't know if there is any, but if some TED Talks organizers are listening to this podcast, who knows, maybe, definitely down to organize one, and we'll have Eleanor with us for sure. Maybe not for the networking event afterwards, but that's something we would be interested in. All right, we covered quite a lot. That's amazing. Thank you so much, Eleanor. I don't know if there is anything else you'd like to add to either the major trends, TMI in particular, Treasury associations, or any other hot topics that you would like to.
Yeah, I think we've done a fairly good kind of whistle-stop tour of everything, but the thing that is always on my mind is with all of this change going on, treasurers being so busy and so much being expected of them, that just to have an eye on well-being, mental health is so important. I really do worry about burnout in treasurers. I see a lot of them that are doing quite much, especially those that are running treasury associations as well. So just be conscious of your mental health, be conscious of well-being, and check in on people around you as well and see how they're doing. That would be my only advice.
Awesome. No, but you're right. That's super, super important. All right. We'll put some of the links that we mentioned already in this episode. But if people would like to reach out either to you, my advice is email or LinkedIn. Please get Eleanor to answer. Or maybe directly to TMI, because you guys are doing a lot. Where should people go if they want either to learn more or to be in touch or see where your next event is? Where should they go?
So the TMI website is probably the best place where everything's together. So that's treasury-management.com. Everything's on there. You can email us, tmi@treasury-management.com. I'm always open to chatting on LinkedIn, as I said. So just look for me, Eleanor Hill. I've got red hair, so it's very obvious once you stumble across me.
Awesome. That's perfect. We'll put all this in the description. Thank you so much, Eleanor.
Thank you for having me.